Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses, and I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant and intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. And I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So just a reminder that if you are attending live, you're in listen-only mode. So if you look at your toolbar, there's a Q&A box. You can start typing questions in there at any time on any topic. And we'll try to get to all the questions during the session. There's also a chat box. We'll be communicating some links and other information to you in the chat box. Feel free to check that out as the session goes on. If you're watching this as a recording, and I know a growing number of you are watching this as recordings, so that's a wonderful thing. Just a disclaimer that everything we say today is true to the best of our knowledge on April 17th, 2024. Always check NIH because things change quickly, especially right now. Things are in the midst of changing very quickly at NIH, and we'll be talking about that a bit as well. So what you should be viewing in the library right now, I would say that you're probably, if you're applying in the R series, you're probably hopefully past the preparation steps and past writing your specific aims and starting on chapters 3 and 4, where you're working on the significance, innovation, and approach sections. And kind of deep in the writing of that and getting ready to send drafts off to your external reviewers. NIH updates. I'm fresh off of the seminar that NIH just gave about an hour or two ago on the new simplified framework for the scoring criteria. I don't know if others of you have viewed that, but we are monitoring these changes closely, particularly the changes coming up to Forms I package, which will go into effect for application deadlines on or after January 25th, 2025. There'll be other changes, not just the scoring criteria changes. There'll be changes to the biosketch and a bunch of other changes as well. They haven't explained all the changes yet. They're about to release some information, and they're going to be updating a lot of the NOFOs that have been around for a while, like the parent R01 NOFOs are going to be reissued imminently. So we are tracking all of that, and we'll be reporting back to you in excruciating detail all the information that you need to know to work on your grant applications. The good news is that I don't think the research strategy is going to be changing dramatically. It's really more a scoring criteria change. So today we have a tutorial. I want to welcome back my friend Agnella Izzo Matic, a friend and colleague. So I invited Agnella back because we both started our careers as scientists, research scientists. We both have PhDs in STEM fields. And the main types of writing that you do as a person in that field are grant applications and publications. I have expertise in one, she has expertise in the other. And I've always thought about the idea that a lot of researchers take the exact same approach to writing these two types of documents, which I think is a huge mistake because they are reviewed very differently, and I think that should really dictate the way you write them. So Agnella and I co-wrote a blog post on this topic, and we're gonna kibitz a little bit today about like what that is, what that looks like in our opinion. So welcome back, Agnella.
Thank you very much for having me back, Meg, and thank you to all our participants for joining us this afternoon. Well, if it's this afternoon, if you're on the East Coast or Central Time.
Right.
Yeah, so as Meg mentioned, I have my PhD and my background's in biomedical engineering, and I was a tenure track faculty member for a few years, and so have been deep in the weeds of both writing the scientific manuscripts and writing the grant applications. And I think, Meg, I probably did not realize at the time how differently I should have been approaching both the grant writing and the scientific manuscripts, and did the same thing where I would approach it just with the researcher hat of I can tell the same story to everybody, and
Me
both
too.
audiences will appreciate how wonderful the research is, obviously.
Yeah.
Now having been working on writing primarily scientific manuscripts and other peer-reviewed publications for almost 12 years now, as you know, my career transition, I can definitely appreciate the differences and how you need to approach writing a manuscript and a grant application. So,
So let's talk a little bit about the let's go step by step how the applications are reviewed and compare the reviewer behavior, I guess, is kind of one of the things that I think a great deal about as somebody who works on grant applications.
sure.
What is reviewer behavior like? So let me describe what happens when you upload to the grants.gov portal and the initial steps that you have to kind of, the initial hurdles you have to clear. So so, because there are many, of course, I'm in both of these types of reviews, right? You have to clear several hurdles. So, with an NIH grant application, you upload to the grants.gov portal. It hopefully gets routed to the study section that you requested in your assignment request form. And from there, the scientific review officer who oversees that study section will choose from among their panel of reviewers. It's usually 25 or 30 reviewers. They'll choose the three that they think have expertise most closely aligned to the application. And those people will review the application ahead of the study section meeting. They will post their scores to a portal. I believe they have 24 hours to read the other two reviewer scores and amend their scores based on the information that the other reviewers posted. And based on that, the top half of the application, so you're scored against your cohort within that time period, within that particular session. The top half will advance to be discussed at the study section meeting, and the bottom half will be triaged, and that's the end of their story. So, what's the initial review like for a typical manuscript? And I know it can vary by journal, but
Sure. So I think in most journals, there is somebody who works in the editorial office who will take a look at the whole submission package and make sure that it just conforms to their formatting requirements, that you have, if they've requested that you have a cover letter, that the cover letter is there. If they've requested, and the really fun thing about writing scientific manuscripts is there's not one format, as you can, hopefully follow. Once the NIH decides what their rules are, the rules are the rules. Well, journal to journal can vary a lot. So there's somebody in the editorial office who usually makes sure that what you've submitted includes and conforms to all of their formatting instructions, and all the documents that they want are there. That same person, or potentially another person in the editorial office, will then look at the content of the manuscript, probably just the abstract or the cover letter initially, to determine at a really high level, is the material novel enough to be a new publication? Is it going to be interesting enough to their audience that reads that or that journal? And then, does it sound like it's a good fit for them? And then once the editorial stage has passed, and if you have, sufficiently demonstrated that it's a good enough scientific manuscript to be considered, then they will pass it on to usually between 2 to 4 peer reviewers for a more in-depth review.
so what would be, in your opinion, what would be some key pieces of advice to make it past the first cut?
Sure.
It sounds like the abstract is like the most important
Yes,
document at that
scientifically,
point.
for the content of the manuscript, I think the abstract has to be within their formatting requirements, if it says 250 words, it's got to be 250 words. Nobody in the editorial office is going to look fondly on a 275 word abstract or 300-word abstract. And that then gives them the indication of, okay, well, maybe the rest of this manuscript is not up to par either from just even if it's just our formatting instructions. But abstract should be really buttoned down pretty tightly. However, I would encourage the authors to save the writing the abstract until you're at least in a solid second or third draft of the manuscript, because as you and your co-authors or any external, colleagues are reviewing the manuscript based on their input and, potential tweaks to the manuscript that you're making in the data, you may need to go back and change the abstract if you've written it at the very beginning of the writing. So I really prefer to wait till, like a solid second or third draft to actually write the abstract. But you should review it very closely yourself when you're writing it. Make sure that you're really hitting the key points of the objective or the rationale for the study. I don't think you need to spend too much time on introductory materials, but make sure the reader understands why you're doing this. What's the gap in our understanding or data? Enough of the methods so they can understand what type of a study it is, and then make sure you hit those key points of the results that are the really important ones that may, be very impactful for your field, and a sentence or two in the discussion and conclusion for the, the most important takeaway messages for the audience.
So it's very different at NIH because there is a project summary / abstract that you have to write. It's 30 lines. That's the limit, which is a lot of text. It's pretty long. But I would say a lot of reviewers never read it. So that is not the key document.
The specific aims page. Yeah.
On an A0, on a first submission, the specific
Right.
aims page is the most important thing. So I would say that reviewers typically begin with the specific aims page and the budget.
Yeah.
So, or at least that's what they seem to report. My clients who are reviewers seem to report that. And you don't wait until the end to write the specific aims page. In fact, you begin the process, in my opinion, with drafting a specific aims page, and that drives all of your prep steps and just gets revised again and again and again. But like the way you described the abstract, it has to meet spec. Everything on federal grant applications has to meet spec, and I think that's the same for both of us. Like if you're one character over a page on the specific aims page, you're going to get an error message when you upload. So you have to meet all the specs that are laid out. So once you clear this hurdle of this first review, and it actually, in the case of a grant application, goes to the study section meeting, and in your case, actually gets assigned to those 2 to 4 reviewers. Let's talk a little bit about that next hurdle that they've got at the go, no go that you have to clear. And to me, this is the most important one in grant applications anyway. It's this discussion at the study section meeting. I think it's the one that most applicants fear the most and are most familiar with, although it's only one of 3 areas where you can get cut. So on a grant application, it is, if you make that first cut, it goes to be discussed at the entire panel of reviewers. So that's 25 or 30 people. So the key thing to know here is that everybody votes equally. So you have like 30 people voting, and the scores are going to be averaged across those 30 people. So while your primary reviewer is probably going to lead the discussion, their opinion is going to be valued and weighted because, at least in theory, they have the closest expertise to your area of research. It is going to be voted equally by everybody. And the crucial thing that I want people to know is that nobody reads the application at the study section meeting, right? Like, it is probably, R01s are like, just the research strategies, like 10,000 words. Nobody is reading it while that discussion is going on. They're skimming it. And so this is where I become very curious about reviewer behavior, because if the application is even the assigned reviewers, in theory, we hope they read the whole thing ahead of time, but they read a big stack of applications. Like years ago, they might have been assigned 6 applications. Now they're being assigned 10, 12, or more applications. So even within their cohort of assigned applications that they read, they're skimming at the study section meeting to jog their memory about the details of yours, and nobody else is reading it. They're skimming it while people are talking at them. So this is where I think one of the biggest points of divergence in the way these documents are written occurs, is that grant applications have to be written so that the key information, so that you can skim it. And I'm a big advocate for writing it like a newspaper and not like a manuscript. So what I mean by that is, don't bury the lead. Don't, have a page or two of unformatted text where you logically build to a conclusion. You've got to put the conclusion at the top in bold as a headline, and then the details below it. Or reviewers will miss it. And, like, I have so many applicants who come to me and say, like, can you help me on my resubmission? Like, they're saying all these things, but I did all those things. All the things the reviewers are saying, I did them all. But that's
They just
your
didn't notice it.
exactly. And if they're missing it, that's a formatting issue, or potentially a writing issue. So I think a lot of applications, grant applications at NIH fail at that stage, not because it's not the science isn't superb. I mean, the top 20% of applicants statistically cluster very tightly. So how do you distinguish yourself among the pack? It's not enough to do great science. You've got to format it in a way that reflects an understanding of reviewer behavior during the study section meeting. So that's one of the things that I always tell people, and I work very hard at working with people to format it to facilitate skimming so that you can't miss the key points. Sometimes it's, text boxes with key points in it. Sometimes it's creating a figure or a table that captures key information so that they can't miss it.
You really
Um,
want to make it easy for your readers and your reviewers to, in related to the specific reason that they're there reading, make it easy for them to answer the questions that they either want to answer or have to answer it for their,
yeah,
scientific officer in that discussion.
yeah.
Same
Which is
thing for peer reviewers. You want to make it easy for them to achieve what they need to in their report back to the editor, and making a decision on whether or not, to publish it. Try to create that argument like in their head for why should we publish this?
Yeah. Yeah, you have to think like a reviewer when you're writing it, or at least maybe think, like, write it. And then as you're editing it later on in the subsequent more polished drafts, put your reviewer hat on and think as if you were a reviewer. Why should, they're going to get great applications from many people across the country in a variety of fields. Why should they
Yeah,
score this one?
try to anticipate those reviewers' questions and answer them before, like make, head them off at the pass.
Yeah. And you brought up another point, which is always making sure that you understand exactly what the scoring criteria are. Happily, in the R series at NIH, the instructions and scoring criteria match. They didn't used to prior to 2007, which is crazy making. It's not always the case on like center grant or complex use that the instructions and scoring criteria match, which is a conundrum because you have to write to one of these, like it's really hard. But one of the things that can be very helpful as you're writing is to have the scoring sheet in front of you, what the reviewers are going to be looking at, which is not the same as the NOFO will actually have information about how it's scored, but you can actually search for the actual scoring sheet. It's available online for the actual scoring sheet that reviewers are going to be working from. So it's really helpful to have that on a screen while you're writing, I think. So how important is it with instructions in manuscripts to write to the criteria?
I think it's important to write, especially to get by that first pass of the editorial office, certainly.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen and heard of plenty of manuscripts that got kicked back just because, somebody missed some instruction. There are also journals that have super specific instructions. For example, in my field, like New England Journal of Medicine, I know Science has some very particular ways that they want things formatted. It's some of it, I think the instructions for formatting get less important at the peer reviewer stage. I think it's really the content of the manuscript that shines at when you're with the peer reviewers or not. But I still think, as you format your, grant applications, I think judicious use of subheaders can be very helpful, especially if you have, different sections of methods and results that you're presenting to really guide and try to do them as parallel as you can, describing out the methods section by section and then describing out the results section by section with subheaders so that in connecting those two to make it just, again, easier for the reader to understand where they are in the whole story.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one thing that I want to say that I think is true for both, and that I think the vast majority of writers are guilty of, um, don't write long sentences. I know this is like kind of a silly and obnoxious thing to say, but in both types of writing, you want to go for simple declarative sentences. If your sentences are going to 3, 4, 5, 6 lines or more with multiple lengthy clauses and multiple periods, pump the brakes. Like this is not good. You're used to speaking and thinking in shorthand about your fields because you're immersed in this field all day, every day, but your reviewers are not. So you want to strive for simple declarative sentences. So, just get information on the page in whatever section you're writing, but as you do your edit, be really sensitive to the idea that you've got to shorten these sentences so that they're easier for outside readers to digest. I think that's true in both types of writing.
Absolutely. And I would say the active voice is okay to use nowadays. I think
Yes.
some of us
Yep.
who maybe were trained a few years ago or had advisors who were trained a few years ago
Yeah.
and taught us how to write, the convention used to be much more passive voice. You are never allowed to use the first person. I think that both of those, certainly the active voice is very well acceptable these days.
Yes.
I think
Yep.
the first person writing can be acceptable in certain, sections of a manuscript, and presumably it's okay in the grant applications as well.
Absolutely. NIH had years ago, they came out with something called, the federal government came out with something called the Plain Language Initiative. And one of the things it talks about is, I believe it talks about the use of the active voice. When I was working at NIH way back in the 90s, they were talking about using the active voice in scientific writing at NIH. And we were both trained to use the passive voice. But yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to read something written in the active voice.
Yes.
It's really stilted to read something in the passive voice. And for those who have no idea what we're talking about, because I know we're all scientists and not English majors here, it would be instead of saying the passive voice would be something like the experiments were conducted. There's no subject there, like they're just happening, that's the passive voice, and it's kind of stilted and unpleasant to read that kind of writing. It's okay now to say we conducted the experiments, to actually put the subject in there. And in an NIH R series applications, it's always we. The last time you use the word I is the K series. So the K and F series, you can say I, but once you're in the R series, it's we. And I would imagine in manuscripts, it's typically we, unless it's a single author.
Yeah, I haven't seen too many single author papers recently, so it's usually we. Yeah.
Yeah. So we just have a few minutes left and we do have a couple of questions. So I just want to say very quickly that the final level of review at NIH, which very few applicants seem to know about, the study section awards the score, but the council awards the money. And the same things are going to be true there where you want to make the document skimmable. And if you're at or near the funding line, like hovering somewhere around the funding line, you could reach out to your program officer ahead of the council meeting, because you'll get the score ahead of the council meeting, and ask if you can prepare some talking points for them to take into the council meeting to make a pitch for funding for your application. I think that's kind of a different, the advisory council to the institute director could be composed of anybody, community members, lawyers, legislators, public health people. But mostly it's going to be the program officers who carry those discussions, which is one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of building a relationship with the PO. So I think that's vastly different than, do you want to talk for just a few minutes about the
Yeah,
revision process?
sure.
Because that's
So the
very,
peer in the manuscripts, the peer reviewers will usually give scores on two. Usually it's two, sometimes three categories. Back to the editorial office, and the editorial office are the ones who ultimately make the decision to publish or not. But the reviewers will give a score based on, their recommendation to publish or not, and also something along the lines of the novelty of the manuscript and or the scientific rigor of the manuscript. And it's, I've seen like a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 scale for
okay.
those, depending on the journal. But editorial office editor, section editor decides whether to publish or not. You can appeal if the decision is immediately like a no, but sorry, if the decision after peer review is not to publish, but you have peer review comments, then you can try to push back and maybe ask the editorial office if can we try to address some of these peer review comments and resubmit? Sometimes they'll allow it, sometimes not. But the revision process, if you do get comments back and they say, either minor or major revisions, before, we'll make a decision on publishing. Minor revisions, you should definitely just make whatever revisions there and go right ahead. Major revisions, in my experience, for the most part, are addressable, whether whether you make the changes in the manuscript or you give a reply in the response letter to explain, maybe why we can't address all of these points right now, but, this is the reasoning why we think these are still valid results, even without conducting new experiments or whatever the reviewer is asking for. So.
Okay. I mean, that opens up a whole other discussion, which we won't have time for today, but I will say that in theory, you can push back on the score of a grant application. I've never seen it successful. If anybody knows of an instance where that has been successful, let me know. But I have seen that succeed exactly 0 times in my entire career at NIH. So let me know if you have a different experience with that. And then like the whole idea of a resubmission and revisions and responding to, like it's a very different thing at NIH. Of course, you have to get the first set of scores back and close that out before you can even consider a revision. And how you respond to the comments is almost like a whole other topic that we could do a whole other session on.
Absolutely. That is a lot of the work, is how to
How
address
to,
the comments so that
yeah,
you will hopefully have a favorable
yeah.
decision
Yeah,
on your.
maybe we'll do another session just on revisions to manuscripts versus revisions to grant applications. So for people who are interested, we did co-author a blog post. The URL for that is in the chat. If you're interested in learning more about Agnella, her contact information is in the chat as well, along with her website. And I can answer the questions here very quickly. But the first one is, do you have resources for students new to this NIH process and are thinking of applying for NF31? So I don't know what organization you're at, if your organization has access to the full library, But Master the K series has an enormous amount of overlap with the F series. So I would recommend that if you have access to it, watch Master the K series. The other thing that may be helpful for you is to look at Optimize Your Funding Mechanism, which is really for novice NIH applicants who are wading through the alphabet soup of like the different NOFOs and what's the difference between like RFAs and PARs. What is a NOFO? What is a NOC? Like all these different things. It's really kind of meant for people who are just coming to this as novices. So if your organization has access to the full library, you will have access to that. There's a person who asked about the K01 parent announcement due date of May 8th, 2024. When I emailed the program officer, they said they could not really confirm or deny whether this will be renewed. I'm hoping to apply for the June cycle. It's going to be renewed. They're just yanking your chain. Like I've never seen the parent K01 not be renewed in decades of work with NIH. So it'll be renewed. Fear not. There will always be a parent K01 at NIH. I guess the question is whether or not that institute will participate, but it's pretty rare that at this point, the ones that participate are participating and the ones that aren't. So it's almost certain to be renewed. Somebody asked if I could comment on the simplified framework. I have entire sessions scheduled just to do that, multiple sessions. But I'm going to do that a little later because NIH has not released all their information yet. They kept alluding to it in the seminar today, changes that are pending. But I think I have 3 or 4 sessions mapped out for right after the October 5th deadline as people are prepping for the February 5th deadline, where we're going to look at it in detail. It really emphasizes rigor. I stepped away for a moment, so apologies if this was addressed. While we know that manuscript writing style generally does not lead to success in grant proposal, what about the opposite? If a manuscript were written in a more headline first proposal style, would that fly? So that's an Agnella question.
I think that's a good question. I think titles of the manuscripts can be written in a more headline style approach for certain journals. Some journals have very specific instructions that say, no, it needs to be a very neutral or factual statement without any real conclusions in the title. I think it depends on the journal. Some journals will allow more creativity with subheader titles. Some very specifically say it's introduction, it's methods and materials and methods, it's results, it's discussion, and then it's conclusions, and there are no subheaders. So I would say in those instances, especially in the discussion, make that first line or two of your discussion, regardless of what the header formats can or can't be, make the first line or two of your discussion section be that headline statement or two. Because to be honest, that is sometimes the first place that many readers and reviewers included will go to first to understand what is this paper all about. So that I think is certainly, and abstract too. I think you can do that in a couple places in the abstract
Right.
text itself.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So another person said and this was a question on the NIH seminar today, if I submit an R01 this cycle with the current formatting, will I need to resubmit the A1 in the new formatting for 2025, assuming it gets scored? So just to be clear, that was a question that was asked several times in the seminar. The formatting is technically not changing. It's really the program officers on the call made it really clear that the changes are for the reviewers and that they're not meaning for the format of the applications to change. Having said that, I have some ideas about how I might tweak the formatting to reflect some of the changes that are coming down the pike. But we'll get to that. I'm reserving judgment as all the information is published about the upcoming changes. So it shouldn't be an issue because the formatting isn't really supposed to change. You should be able to put in a resubmission using the same formatting, and it's the reviewers who are going to have to score it differently. So We are looking for applying for a lab-based R50. Do you have some template in your library? No, I don't. The Master of the R series is probably not going to help with an R50. It's a very different type of thing. But I could do a mini tutorial on that in a future AGE, and I'll add that to the topic. So that is it, and we are over time. So thank you all for your enthusiasm. I think the next three sessions, you're just going to be stuck with me answering questions. So I kind of try to reserve the sessions leading up to the major deadlines for questions. So, because people are actively writing and they have a lot of questions. So feel free to come armed with your questions about your Cycle 2 deadline applications. And Agnella, a pleasure as always. And I will reach out again and we'll set up another session for talking about how to do revisions on manuscripts versus revisions on grant applications and how they're the same or different. So that would be a little
Absolutely.
fun.
Sounds good. That's an important part of the process. It was a great
Yeah.
afternoon talking with you, Meg. Thank you.
Yeah. Take care. Thanks again.
Bye
Take care,
bye.
everybody. Good luck on your applications. Bye bye.